Last one of those, or at least last time we'll watch that here. So thanks for being a part of this long journey through Psalm 23 with us. I know what you're thinking right now. It's like, you go back and send her back up, right? Like, let Teresa keep talking. I agree. So I try to get her to do my job for me as often as I can. It's hard to get done. So a couple, some of you will know that we said goodbye to Sandy Dundas yesterday, and that's always quite an experience anytime you're leading someone's memorial. And I only say that because she's been a part of this place for years, and it turns out was deeply impacted by Christ here. And also just want to say, way to go for those of you who, there were so many of you who were so a part of those last couple weeks of her life in the hospital. And it was really neat to watch her greater community kind of see what had happened in her, and then also to see the relationships formed there. So, and it was a reminder to me that, we've kind of built this place to make it safe for you to hide. We understand that for a lot of you that you're not here because you're looking for friends. You're here because you're just kind of trying to get internal, and that's totally okay. And if you decide that you want connection, there's certainly ways to do that, but it doesn't come by way of signing up on a card. It comes by way of getting connected through volunteering and some of the different things. And so, man, if we can ever help you get connected that way, let us know. Because her story was another one of those stories that just reminds us that we can live these solitary, single-family dwelling, screen-driven lives. But when the wheels fall off, there's not much help in any of those kinds of approaches. So holler if we can help you get connected. This morning we are going to wrap up this conversation from Psalm 23, and I don't know how. I was trying to think about how to get started here, and I was thinking, like, how many of you have ever panned for gold? Like, is that something? I'm blown. I was convinced one person. Like, you guys need some hobbies. Just kidding. But seriously, I was blown away. I'm sure it's a fun thing. Or fishing, which I would never make fun of fishermen, but like panning for gold, fishing, I suppose hunting in some respect, lots of things in life. There's this task involved where we put in lots and lots and lots of time, and most of it's unfruitful, or at least it doesn't appear immediately to be fruitful, and only later do we get a result, right? So I would guess that panning for gold is something where you do the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, and 99% of the time you get no result, and 1% of the time you do get a result, and that's what keeps you going. And for me, fishing would be 99.99999%, which is why I go to Vans and buy my fish, because it's just a complete waste of my time to even attempt that. But even if you're a great fisherman, there's this assumption, or think of sales. The art of sales is knowing that you're never going to bat 1,000, and so it becomes a volume game at some level, right? Well, what I'm realizing, and I think I have for a while, but the jumping off point for me this morning is this realization that for me, reading and research, and I think of my role on Sundays as kind of a content curator or plagiarist, however you want to think about that, and I'm trying to genuinely be impacted by ideas and by God and have an experience and then share that, knowing that as best I can tell, a big piece of the Sunday puzzle is just creating an experience that allows you to reflect inward and wrestle with God no matter where you're at there. I actually met with a friend yesterday who, I love the way he said it. He's pretty new to the Narrate culture, and he said, man, Adam, one of the ways that I'm understanding Narrate is it's a place for people who are trying to figure out how to let God in. I just loved that description. And some of you have been trying to figure out how to do that for decades, and others of you for weeks. Well, all that to say that for me, there's this realization that when it comes to reading or research, if you're a student, you can appreciate this. It's the same thing. It's you're doing something, and 90% of the time the book is no good, the chapter is no good, the quiet time wasn't all that moving, and 10% of the time you get a result. And I had that happen here recently from some stuff I was reading, and it's kind of where I want to center this whole conversation. There's a guy named Dr. David Benner. He teaches in the Seattle area. He's kind of an authoritative voice in spiritual direction, which is this practice that I'm studying academically right now at George Fox or Portland Seminary. It'll always be George Fox to me. But the unique thing about Dr. Benner is he has advanced degrees in both theology and psychology. And I'm reading this book right now called Sacred Companions, and he made this statement, and it was one of those like, oh yeah, this is why I show up in the morning and do some reading. He said this, actually this was for class. He said this, God doesn't want me to try to become more loving. He wants me to absorb his love so that it flows out from me. And I guess what I want to do this morning is we kind of park this conversation about Psalm 23 is ask this question, what if he's right? Like, what if Christianity and being formed into God's image, what if it's not a try harder thing? What if it's not a list of commands? In fact, what if that's part of what got Paul and Jesus in so much trouble, is they were insisting that God's intention wasn't a list of dogma, it was an experience of a person that would so impact you that it changed the way you lived? And what if Psalm 23 isn't just another list of things to do, but it's the reflection of a person who is somewhat centered, at least in that moment, on the fact that there is a benevolent, kind, caring God who loves him in this case, and he's just centering himself in that. And I think the warning there, because I know this would be my tendency, and I'm assuming many of you share this, that I'm looking for things to do. Like, to be is hard. I want things to do. So when I open my Bible, when I read books, when I think about the next series, it's like, what are the things that we can do? And that's what we've done in this series. And I'm not throwing it all out, don't get me wrong. But if you think about it, we focused on Psalm 23 as this prompt to do lots of things. We've talked about surrender and just noted, like, the Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. That at the very outset, what that is this question of who's in charge. And do you trust someone else other than yourself to be in charge? That sparked conversations about surrender. We even talked about vulnerability, and that our natural tendency is to step away from vulnerability, but this God seems to call his people to embrace their vulnerability and trust him in it. We had a pretty honest conversation about, like, okay, so then how do we know this God? If the whole thing's predicated on the fact that this God is good, how do we know that he's good? And we had what was my best attempt to speak to why I think the Gospels and the life of Jesus is so important. Because while we have a long history of God revealing himself for people, we have the culmination of that in his Son. And we talked then, like, I really genuinely think, I would never tell you to do this, but I genuinely think that every Christ follower should have a season of a couple of years where they just don't leave the Gospels. Because very quickly what you see is your image of God is it looks different when it's centered in Jesus. The way you hear God speaking to you, the way you understand God would speak to others, the whole thing is morphed by just the life of Christ. And then the last couple of weeks we've talked about trust. We've explored this idea that God is for you in your trust, and he wants to move us from this kind of propriety, kind of plays by the rule trust to this surrendered trust. But remember, we explored that God can't do it for you, that we'll have to step forward. And then last week we talked about the flesh and the spirit and this invitation to live a surrendered life, and that when we fail to live up to our or God's expectations, perhaps it's because we forgot that life isn't about us. So my point would be this: it's all been about what we do. And I'm not necessarily saying that's not true, but what if David, a seasoned warrior, a leader who's seen both the highs and lows of leadership, a parent who's buried a child and yet at the same time has had successes as a parent, who's had other seasons where his sons were just out to get him, a husband who's made some mistakes in his relationships? What if Psalm 23, as much as any of those things, is this device that just centers us in the fact that we don't necessarily have to do anything? In fact, what if a good picture of what it means to be a Christian is to be a sponge that just figures out what are the places, what are the activities, what are the things that you can do in life that allows you to absorb God's love and then live that out? And I get it. Like, as soon as I knew that I felt like this was the direction we needed to go this weekend, I felt unqualified, because I'm not that sappy sentimentalist who can talk about God's love very well either, but maybe that's what qualifies. But here's where I want to challenge you is, what if Dr. Benner's right? What if Christianity is as much about being impacted by God's love and what happens after that as it is a list of commands that we then do things? Think of it this way. In 1 Corinthians, perhaps the most famous text in the whole New Testament in our culture, especially our post-Christian culture, is this one we find in 1 Corinthians, because it's still pretty familiar at weddings. Paul says this at the end of what is a pretty long letter: love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it's not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it's not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Here's a question. Is Paul here? Remember, this is a letter he wrote to real people dealing with real circumstances, and this is kind of on the back end of that conversation. Is Paul here giving us a list of commands? Is that what he's doing? Is he saying, okay, so what you need to do is be patient, be kind, don't envy, don't boast, don't be proud, Don't dishonor others. Don't be self-seeking. Don't be easily angered. Don't keep any records of wrong. Don't delight in evil. Lots of don'ts, by the way. Rejoice in the truth. Always protect. Always trust. Always hope. Always persevere. Is that what Paul is doing? Or is Paul rather observing this is what love does? Is he telling you a list of things that you better be able to do if you're going to feel good about yourself as a Christian, and you better wake up and try harder at that? Or is he observing that when you connect with the love of God, this stuff will happen? You see why this matters, because places like this and people like me, it very easily center it on, I tell you why you need to come to church, because there's more stuff you need to do. And without me telling you what to do, you could never measure up. And that reminds me of my friend Kyle Ketchum years ago when we were doing youth ministry together. There was this season where he was just somewhat, frankly, cynical of the Sunday experience. And he said to me, Adam, I could not go to church for the rest of my life and still not have enough time to do everything I've been told to do at church over the course of my lifetime. Is that what it's all about? You know, Paul in Galatians, for the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, and self-control. Is that another instance where Paul's going, here's what you need to do? Or is fruit of the Spirit kind of an important moniker there? And it reminds us that you can't control that. You can control the conditions around that. One of my favorite spots in the whole Bible is the statement that Paul made to Timothy. Timothy, we know him to be this very cowardly, kind of timid person, and I relate a lot to that. And so Paul would often write him these letters in order to kind of spur him to not be such a weenie. And at the start of his second letter, he said this, for the Spirit of God does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. And again, here's the question. Is Paul saying to Timothy, here's the things you need to do. Be powerful. Be more loving. Be all these things. Or is Paul just saying to Timothy, hey, you know when you're kind of trying to figure out what voice are you listening to and is it the right voice? Is Paul going, listen, if you're connected with God's love, then what you're going to see is confidence and courage and curiosity, not fear and doubt and catastrophizing. What if this thought that the Christian experience is really about experiencing God isn't really as off as we might think at first glance? You know, there's another story found in Jesus' life where actually Dallas Willard says that next to the cross, the moment in Jesus' life that most embodies God's liking of us and love for us is found in John 13. Now, John 13 might be a familiar scene to you. We actually talked about it a couple weeks ago. In John 13, they're practicing the Lord's Supper, which is they're observing the Passover meal. Remember, we talked even then that at the Passover, it's not tables and chairs. It's like their custom was this. And this is important because it reminds us, so food's there, people are this way. Part of what you see then is that feet were a very big part of the whole eating, dining experience in Eastern culture, which means that it explains why washing of feet became such a big part of the culture. Because they're gross. Think of what your chacos smell like in the middle of July. It's disgusting. And so the custom, and this is what I didn't know, the custom was that the host of a meal was responsible to arrange for the washing of the feet. But at the Lord's Supper, or this last meal, at this Passover, there was no host. And so Dallas Willard points out that one of the internal conversations that would have been happening in all of the disciples at this meal would have been, so who's washing the feet? Like, who's going to do that? Because they would have already recognized there isn't a host. Therefore, nobody here has arranged to hire some kind of servant or slave to wash our feet, so who's going to do it? And they would have known it wouldn't be Jesus, because, of course, he's far too important for that, but it's really a conversation of who's batting 12th? Like, who's the fourth person off the bench? Because someone has to be, but nobody wants to be. And it's there where we pick up with an experience that you may be familiar with. It says Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he'd come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Now, rest assured, I'm not about to wash anybody's feet. Here's the question that I want to ask is, Because, right, we show up and call ourselves followers of Jesus or prospective followers of Jesus, which would imply we serve others. Why did Jesus wash their feet? What was it a function of, well, because I'm Jesus, I'm going to spark a whole movement that's about serving people, so I've got to go do this. Was that the reason? Or does Paul actually John give us the reason? John 13, Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, that he'd come from God and was returning to God. Jesus was secure is the way I read that. He was grounded in who he was and who he was. And is it possible that he didn't like drum up this idea? It just naturally happened because that's how love had impacted him. I think of that with something like Ecuador and the work that Teresa and Nareem are doing. Did they come up with some kind of corporate to-do list? This was what would make for a good NGO kind of organization. Or is it just flowing from people who have been impacted? And there's not necessarily this checklist of priority. It's just just go love people. Here's where I think that would be important. We in church history, and I'm not totally criticizing it, but maybe question it a little, our response to John 13 has been to create foot washing ceremonies. Because that's what Jesus did. But I wonder if that kind of misses the point of what John's really getting at here. Is he saying, therefore, disciples wash feet? Or is he saying followers of Jesus are first and foremost impacted by who they are and whose they are, and everything flows from that? I know it's a little academic, but think of it this way. Think of how exhausting it is to not be liked by someone. My friend Fred, who has the credibility to make observations like this, he told me one time that at any given point, 10% of your population is mad at you. Which is kind of an exhausting thought, isn't it? And some of you are like, I need a different job so my population's smaller. And that wasn't him saying, therefore, be flippant about it, that we have this responsibility to live at peace. But nonetheless, why is it so exhausting when you know somebody doesn't like you anymore? When someone, why do you lose sleep over those things? You've got lots of friends. Why can't you just write them off? You've got lots of business partners. Why can't you just say to heck with those ones? Why is it so exhausting? And conversely, why is it so? Why are you so emboldened when you know someone likes you? We explored this a little bit a couple weeks ago, but think about the boss or the coach or the teacher that just liked you. And why does that? Like, you look back and you go like, your favorite sport wasn't cross country. You just bumped into a coach who liked you. Why does it happen that way? When I decided to go back to college, I didn't go right out of high school. And my friend Fred helped me to see, like, hey, you should go become a teacher. So I went to MSU Billings, which is where I lived. And of course, because I'd been out for a while, I had to take these placement tests. And I tested pretty average in everything except for in math. I tested at this spot where I could skip some classes. And then everyone was like, dude, you should be a math teacher because those jobs are the easiest ones to get. And so that's what I signed up for, was a math major in education. And so I was in this first semester. I think it was a calculus class. And to be honest with you, I can't see that teacher's face, only the back of his head. And then I was in another class that was a history class. It was a World Civ 100 level kind of general ed class. It was taught by a guy named Dr. Matt Redinger. There were 40 or 50 of us in this big lecture hall. And yet he was personable. And I remember the way he engaged students in class and after class and before class. And by midterm of that semester, I had dropped not just math as a major, but that class altogether. I was like, hey, what's the one that checks the box? Okay, trig, I'll take that. I could do that. Because I loved math in high school, because math plays by the rules, right? It's the best thing. Like, it's predictable, unless you get into theoretical stuff, which I'm not qualified for. But, right, you can control it. I loved it. I dropped math and became a history major. Why? Because suddenly I was enamored with history? Not really. Why? Because of Dr. Redinger. And in fact, I tried to count it this week, and I took well over 20 credits from him, because I was that guy that's like, okay, what's he teaching? If I can find it, make it fit into my degree, I'm taking that. I graduated with a history major in education. Why? Because of Dr. Redinger. What if God works more like that than we often give credit for? What if Christianity, following Jesus, isn't about trying harder, and it's not about waking up in the morning with a list of things to do? What if you were at your best? Think of this in sport. Like, who's going to have a better day at the plate? The kid who's up there thinking about all the mechanics that he spent the offseason working on and everything that you're supposed to do to swing the bat correctly? Or the kid who knows that he worked with really good coaching and he just needs to get up there and swing the bat? What if following Jesus is supposed to look more like that? That we're impacted by and absorbing who he is and the way he feels toward us. And then he just kind of tells us to go for it. And it's not about having this long list of things that people who are Christians who do your job do. It's just about absorbing and then giving back what that looks like. What if it's not as much about dogma and lists of things like we've said? We'll end with this story. There's a guy named Rabbi Akiva. You may have heard of him, maybe not. He's probably the most famous rabbi on this side of Jesus. He was born in AD 50, pretty influential in that early rabbinic Judaism. And there's a famous story that a guy named Ray Vanderland likes to tell about him that involves one day Rabbi Akiva was walking from, it was in the middle of the night, he was walking back to his native village, his home village. It was really dark, it was really foggy, and so in this kind of tight quarters of the Galilee, he got turned around, and where he was supposed to go left, he went right, and he ended up showing up at the wrong city, which, of course, these are little townships, most of which would have been surrounded by a wall. He didn't really know that he made a wrong turn until he got to the wall, but quickly recognized that's not the gate that I thought I was going to come to, this isn't the city, and then about then, he heard this rustling on top of the wall. He looked up to see a guard, and the guard, who was there to keep guys like him out in the middle of the night, yelled down at him. He said, "Who are you? And what are you doing here?" And Rabbi Akiva, of course, that was the first instance that he realized he was lost, and he kind of shook his head and he said, "Excuse me?" And again the guard said, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" And Rabbi Akiva smiled, and he said, "How much are they paying you to ask me those questions?" And the guard's like, "What? Excuse me?" He said, "How much are they paying you to ask me those questions?" And the guard said, 10 denarius a week. And Rabbi Akiva said, "I'll pay you double if you come to my house every morning and ask me those two questions. Who are you? And what are you doing here?" What if Psalm 23, as much as it's about all those other things, is a way of building our day around who we are and whose we are? And therefore, what if the work of that, and this is where I don't know about you, I think following Jesus is a team sport, not an individual sport. But I also think this is one of the areas where as a church we can get ourselves in trouble because it's going to look different for you than for me. And I wonder if one of the real important, valuable things then is, what are those things? And you may not even call them religious or spiritual, but what are those things that you do that when you walk away from that, you just feel grounded in and centered in who you are and whose you are? And again, they might not check any perceived religious checkbox. It might be a run. It might be a hike. It might be a really successful business transaction. But what are the things? It might be a long drive. It might be getting up and reading your Bible in the morning. It might not. What are the things for you that just center you in, oh yeah, this is a grace flowing from me kind of life. Not a kind of clenching, trying to make it all happen, trying to squeeze something out of me that's not really there. What are the places? Probably there's some things that you need to do about once a year. What are those? What are the things that you can do every day? And what if part of what it means to follow Jesus, we see this in his pattern, is he had his own patterns by which he seemed to go do things every day that centered him. But what if they don't have to be the same for you as they are for me? It's just an invitation to know, like, what are they? What centers you in those ways? And listen, I hope Sunday's a part of that picture for you, and if it's not, please go find a church where it does do that for you. But what if Dr. Benner's onto something there, that we don't, when we fail to love, it's not about trying harder, it's about absorbing more. I'd like to pray, and then we're going to sing, frankly, one of my very favorite songs. God, thanks. Thanks for Psalm 23 and the gift that it's been to people for a few thousand years, God. Thanks for its the many different ways we can turn it and see you through it. God, I pray that as a people and as individuals, that you would continue to point out to us how it is that we live a life centered on you, Pray that we wouldn't get caught up in the shame and the supposed to and the have to and the traditionalism, but just a keen sense of awareness of what are those things that center us in you, God. We love you. Amen.
In a moment, our ushers are going to come forward with the offering. So if you take ownership in giving, you can go ahead and prepare for that now. If not, or you're a guest with us, you can just let the buckets go right on by you. Here at Narrate, we're all about gathering and scattering, and we gather here on Sunday mornings at Grand Street. We have some really fantastic teams of volunteers to work to make this a really engaging and welcoming place for everyone. And then the rest of the week, we like to scatter. We like to get into our community and serve people where they're at. And sometimes this scattering takes on a global perspective. So this morning, Teresa's going to share for about 10 minutes about Families with Heart. And Families with Heart is a nonprofit who does some really, really amazing work in Ecuador. So I'm really excited you get to hear from Teresa. And then after Teresa, our ushers will come forward with the offering. So it's all you.
All right. Thanks a lot. So I get the privilege of being married to a handsome Adam right over here and being the mom of 3 boys. And most of all, the honor of getting to be a part of the church, a part of Narrate Church with you guys. I'm constantly amazed by the groups of people that show up and you care about the community and you serve Helena and you care about your personal character and your growth and your spiritual pursuit and connecting with God. And I'm just constantly in awe and kind of just going, wow, thanks, God, that I get to be a part of this group of people that come to Narrate Church and we get to do this together. So thanks for that privilege. But this morning, I'm excited because we get 10 minutes together, and I want to make the best of that 10 minutes that we have together. So up here, you're going to see all kinds of videos and pictures and all that kind of stuff going on because I feel like that 10 minutes, I want you to see what Families with Heart does. Families with Heart is an organization that is a sponsorship, kind of donation organization that works in Ecuador and helps under-resourced families with disabled family members to get to their therapies, get the education and the care that they need. Sometimes it's just basic living cost. So specifically focusing on those under-resourced families because Ecuador is a developing country. And let me tell you, over the past 9 years that I've got to see and be a part of things down there, they have really grown in kind of getting rid of the stigma for disabled people and caring about giving quality of life and the needs that those families have. But there's still, especially in those outlying regions, still needs and still opportunities to help there. So how does Montana get connected with that? Well, let me say that we got to meet Bob and Noreen O'Leary. So Bob is from Butte, and he happened to meet a Peruvian woman that was living in Ecuador. And they came, and Adam and I got to meet them in 2011. And they came and just kind of produced this idea of we really would like to start this organization that does these things down in Ecuador. And it's all about the who, as Adam says, and they are definitely the who gets things done. And we were a project underneath Narrate for about 4 years, and then in 2015 got our own 501c3, and now are a separate organization from that. But let me just give you a quick introduction to Noreen.
I like the people have aprender haciendo, to learn, to make.
Why do you like
education?
Education.
Educate the people for looking for better life.
Mm-hmm.
It's not only bring the money, it's educate. Say, okay, educate for clean your house, educate for make better life, educate for education for your kids. This is why I want maybe change the world one day. Maybe no, change one family together. This is, yeah.
So you could see she is the most lovely person, and she has a degree in social work. And man, when you put her in a family environment with some needs, she does a heck of a job, and she really gets some education done, and she gets those people connected with the resources that they need. And it's a privilege to get to work together with her down in Ecuador. Families with Heart does have a website, so feel free to jump online and check that out. It goes through in depth what our different projects are, kind of some of our history, sponsorship opportunities, and that's a good resource definitely to check out for yourself. And what Families with Heart does with that sponsorship money is we help provide either transportation to therapies, provide therapy itself. Sometimes there's some basic needs that we're addressing when we go visit these families. And what kind of therapies I'm talking about are occupational therapy, physical therapy. We have somebody on the board who is a physical therapist. Her name is Lorena. She lives in Bozeman, Montana. And she brings down a group of students every year, and they work together and do clinics, essentially, for those caregivers down there. Sometimes it's with some nuns that are a part of an orphanage that care for a bunch of disabled kids and adults. And so just equipping them with the tools that they need to provide daily care for those disabled people. Also working with the physical therapists that are down in the region of Puerto Quito, because they're just a few years behind on their technique and interventions as far as what is best for caring and getting these people their mobility back. So she does a great job with that. It's really neat to watch her work and just educate and connect with those families down there. We also do equine therapy, so that's a common thing in the States, in Montana. In fact, in Helena, I know of 2, and then including Carroll College, there's 3 different places that do equine therapy. And if you've not got to ever be a part of that or see that, it's a pretty neat process to see disabled folks get to be a part of connecting. And, sometimes with mental delays or mental kind of health issues, that's also a very helpful thing as well, to connect with creation and another living, breathing, warm-blooded being. There's something that happens there, and those people can also work on developing their own strength versus being kind of manipulated on a mat. They are desiring to do that on their own on those horses. And so Noreen is actually going to get certified to do that so that we have more people that can run those 3 horses that we have. Also, there's another way of connecting that some sponsors really enjoy, and that is being on a personal level, sending letters and photos or gifts. We get to personally deliver those, and sometimes that includes bringing back letters to those sponsorship relationships. So not everybody chooses to do that. There's obviously no pressure to do that, but for the people that like that personal connection, that's definitely an opportunity for you there. Then the third area that we really focus on that is dear to my heart is the area of deaf people, because we would go into these homes and visit and encourage them, hey, we have these therapies, what do you need? How come you don't come to therapy? What can we do for you? And then they would say, well, down the street they have a special needs person in there, and we would show up, and we started to meet more and more deaf people, right? They are normal functioning, but they're deaf, and both of my parents are deaf, and so I grew up in a culture of deaf community that these people down there have not got to experience until we worked on bringing some instructors and bringing that to them. They would have their own little family communication and family sign, but these people were stuck. They could not go out in the community and communicate with anybody else. They couldn't jump transportation. They were lacking education. So what we did is we brought 2 instructors to Santo Domingo, which is a little ways away, and had them be certified in sign language. And they would learn and then bring it back and create these deaf clubs and teach. Obviously, we have the end goal of creating a deaf school where everybody can learn at their own level with their own language. Obviously, inclusion and interpreting is something that is really far down the road. But if we could get a deaf school in that area, because these people go to public school and it's just a bunch of talking. And so for these people to share that language and have a social experience outside of their home has been really a treasure to get to see and be a part of. And it constantly is kind of growing and going in these outlying communities. Sometimes sponsorship money doesn't always go to therapy or to education. Sometimes it goes to just helping personal needs. So we met one family. There's this gal and her daughter. They're both deaf. And when we come and we're checking up on them, and we found out that she had not been attending the deaf club as planned, and we inquired as to why. We're talking with the dad, what's going on, and we started to learn that she actually is being prostituted out in the evenings for him to make money, and that's threatening if they are to go and learn their own language and be able to be independent. So he's keeping them from doing that. So we're working with the local authorities on getting them a safer and a healthier place to live. So sometimes those sponsorships go towards other needs that perhaps we didn't anticipate running into. So as this group has been continuing to grow and expand, and little outlying regions are getting more and more communication and socializing, we have run into kind of a wall. The last couple of years, they've maxed out on what level of sign language they can get to. So they started with 1, 2, 3 words and went to these long sentences where they are communicating, which is beautiful to see. but we've kind of maxed out, and we can't seem to get any more classes in. So that brings us to this year. One of the more recent things that we got to do was we went to Quito, which is the capital of the country, and we started banging on doors and finding people. And we went and met a gal who leads the school, the deaf school there. So obviously the families that we work with have nowhere near any resources to get that far away and send their kids to a deaf school. And so we just told them our story and said, we are trying our best just to create a communication and social experience for this deaf community there. And she says, you bet, let's do it. We will help you. She then connected us to the government building and the government leadership that can get us those resources, because we're not an official school, so we can't just email and say we need these resources and have them give them to us. So once we went to that office, it was a beautiful experience, because I went from being an American in an Ecuadorian culture to then transporting into a deaf culture, which was more my home, and instantly, comfortable and communicating, and we had an interpreter for Nareem instead of myself, right? So it was just a really great experience to get to meet them, and we just told them our story, and he said, you bet, we will get those resources to you. And they're actually going to travel together down there. Him and his wife, they're both deaf, and they have a deaf kiddo. I got to meet him. It was his birthday. We sang him happy birthday in sign language. But anyhow, they're going to go and travel down and meet the people that we're working with. So it's super exciting to see that we are just a few steps closer to perhaps even bringing a deaf school down to that region. So that's what Families with Heart is all about. That's what we do. If you guys want to know more about sponsorship or just general information or how you can be a part of things and help, feel free to come down here and visit with me. I'll be down here after service. And then if you're wanting to know more about our global scattering, our next trip is going to be in 2020. And it costs, so it's a great experience, and I don't want to take a bunch of time to explain it because there's a good 12-minute video on the website if you guys take the time to jump online and look at Narrate's website. And it just gives you an idea about what we do, how hard we work, what the experience is like. One of our trips is what's represented there. And we're going to have an informational meeting in the fall, and would love for you guys to come and be a part of that, just hear what is involved. In the meantime, you can kind of check out that video and maybe start saving your pennies. It is $2,500 a person, so it's a little spendy, but that also doesn't include any other work other than showing up to our meetings and being ready to work hard when we get down there. Our trip will be in August 2020. So thanks for your time this morning.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.